Hello and welcome. I am Katy Razzall, the BBC's culture and media editor and co-presenter of the media show. And I suppose to begin with, what I should say is there's been no shortage of things to talk about in this Trump presidency, but we are here to talk about the impact on the media with a very esteemed panel. I'm delighted that we're going to hear from people on the ground. We're going to hear from people about what's really going on and what it might mean for us here. So in no particular order, I'm thrilled that we've got Roy Wood Jr. here. You will know who he is. He's a prominent voice in US discourse. He's a comedian. He's an Emmy-nominated documentary producer. He was correspondent on The Daily Show, and he's now the American host of Have I Got News For You on CNN. And so I might say, Roy, you're a survivor, because so far Trump hasn't come for you in the way he may have come for some other of your, co-presenting type colleagues.
Not yet, but I feel like this is like Independence Day, and he's taking out some of the bigger cities. And because I'm a Sunday night show, he doesn't watch us. He doesn't know what we do.
He's not watching on Sunday nights, so you're safe for now.
Well, sorry, Saturday nights. We come on Saturday nights,
yeah.
So he's somewhere eating a pizza.
Okay. Also on our panel, Matt Bellany, founding partner of Park, who's What I'm Hearing newsletter. I always say what I'm Hearing newsletter is a vital part of my media diet. I'm sure many of you agree. Matthew's been editorial director of The Hollywood Reporter. He also now hosts the Town podcast, and nothing in the US entertainment industry escapes him. So he's perfect here. Katy Balls, Washington editor now of The Times and Sunday Times. She writes the Washington Insider column. Katy left The Spectator in April, having seen out 5 prime ministers, leaving 1 in the job. So I'm just wondering how Donald Trump's going to do under your tenure in America.
I've only had 3 months so far.
Okay, so we'll see what happens. And of course, Dorothy Byrne needs no introduction. A legend as my overall boss at Channel 4 back in the day when I worked at Channel 4 News. And ever since her McTaggart, a legend here too. We all know Dorothy tells it how it is. So I'm looking forward to that. She's former head of News and Current Affairs at Channel 4. An executive producer now of all sorts of programs, and has numerous award-winning commissions under her belt. But before we start, here is a reminder of how we got here. How's the asylum application going, Roy?
Oh, pretty good. I came to Scotland just to cover all my bases. I want to have access to all these countries. I'm going to Wales next week.
Okay, they're going to welcome you with open arms, I'm sure. There's an awful lot to talk about, obviously. I wanted to just start with getting a sense of the climate in America, the scale of what's going on, and perhaps just a quick fire, 3 adjectives from each of you, starting maybe at this end, which is President Trump's approach to the media in 3 adjectives.
Vindictive, transactional, and codependent would be mine.
Like it.
I'm going to cheat.
It doesn't sound very useful.
I'm going to quote him: I denigrate and demean you so that when you say negative things about me, no one will trust you.
Is that a direct quote?
Yeah, well, nearly.
Okay.
Trump and the media, it's cowardly, it's manipulative, and it's advantageous.
Katy?
I think it's loud, I think it's aggressive, and I think it also is about entertainment.
Yeah, it's going to make great TV, as he said in that film. We obviously are at a TV festival, but actually one of the key things about his second term anyway is, Matt, that sense that actually podcasts and social media, the alternative media, the likes of Joe Rogan, Sean Hannity, The War Room, is that the reality now, actually, that alternative media is the powerful, and certainly a permanent force?
I don't know that it's the permanent force, but it's certainly a player in a way that it hadn't been previously. And I think the powers that be on both sides, to be honest, have recognized that power. And on the Republican side, this was a way to get the message out to people that were feeling that the traditional media outlets were not for them, and they prefer these more freewheeling, more comedic, more sort of conversational style media outlets, and there's a lane there. And I think that the Trump campaign really effectively, and it's been a skill of theirs from the beginning, even in the first term, the media strategy of the Trump people has been very effective in reaching not just the core demographic, but people that were maybe on the fence or that don't engage with traditional media at all, but can be reached through these newer venues. And it's working.
And I've been watching a lot of The War Room in preparation for this. And this is, oh yeah.
To that point, I feel like that exodus of what used to be a centrist media consumer is now a more radicalized media consumer, which means I'm over here consuming only the things that make me feel good and the things that I agree with. It essentially starved American mainstream media of more of their fan base or their viewership. So now the few people we have left, we have to hold on to, which means now for my corporation to survive, I cannot afford to go to war with the president.
And we're definitely going to get into that for sure, because that is very much part of where we're going to head. But just in terms of the mainstream media, the legacy media, traditional media, I don't know how you describe yourself, but something along those lines, maybe, Katy.
The state of mind.
Balls. Okay, but Steve Bannon on his War Room podcast, he recently talked about Trump breaking the media and how there's a real sense of urgency for him in this. Does the mainstream media even still matter in this climate?
So
Can they even compete?
I think we can define mainstream media in different ways. Now, I think, as we've just heard, one of the things that the White House and Trump's campaign team did really effectively in the election was to use podcasts, enter the manosphere, so to speak, to reach those male voters, which really swung the election from the campaign's perspective in Trump's favor. At the same time, though, Trump himself is a cable man. If we think about what Donald Trump likes to watch, he likes to watch Fox News. He has his favorite Fox News presenters, and when he has something important to say, he often gives it to Fox. So for all the talk about the new media, which clearly is a big factor, I have a White House pass. You now go into that White House briefing room, and there are as many, influencers in new media, scarily young, actually, when I think about my own age, filling up one side. It is a changed media landscape, but you still have a situation where, yes, the new media gets to ask the first question at every single press media briefing, but then it falls back actually to what you might call the legacy media brands. They still have assigned seating. They are still very much players within it. So I think that the system has been pluralized to a degree. Also, I think as an international journalist, I've obviously just been in DC for 3 months. So caveat, obviously, blows over that. But speaking to figures who've been in DC a lot longer, who are international outlets, they said under Joe Biden, it was practically impossible to get one of those passes. And actually, almost because there are certain outlets, perhaps, that the White House is not very keen on, it does mean there are opportunities for new media and also outside outlets, which they don't seem to as wrong. So there's different ways of looking at the strategy that they have underway.
And what's wrong with pluralism in media, Dorothy?
Well, pluralism in media is great. It's great to hear from those people. But the problem in the US that Trump is using, and he has identified correctly, is the lack of trust in the mainstream media. Here in this country, we still have very high levels of trust in the mainstream media. In the US, the last figures I looked at were 69% of people in the US do not have no or little trust in the media, and 89% of Republican voters have no or little trust in the media. And I believe that is partly because Trump, etc., put them down, but it's also because they got rid of regulation.
Right, and we might well come back to that towards the end. But I wondered, for the three of you who are there, what is it like being a media professional in Trump's America? Roy, do you feel vulnerable in any way? Are you worried? Are you self-censoring? I'm
not self-censoring, and I'm thankful to have a show that's on a network where CNN on a Saturday night it's different from Monday through Friday. So it's kind of like, it's like in school where the teacher's not there and the class is just watching themselves. And that's kind of how we run the show. And we've never gotten a, hey, don't do that. Hey, what about this? Don't go this hard.
From CNN,
yeah, never from CNN. Nothing but a handshake and a smile. And we've said some shit on that show where I'm like, this is going to be an email tomorrow, and it's not.
Your boss is looking slightly uncomfortable in the audience right now. He's gone down in his chair.
And so But that's also partly because of Jimmy and the fact that we're a legacy show that comes from a country where the show is allowed to punch politicians in the face. And so you have to honor that ethos of the show in the States, or else you're not honoring what we're trying to, recreate. I don't feel scared, I think vulnerable would suggest that you can't fight back. And I think that so long as I have a microphone, my hope is that every comedian will continue to do that. I know we'll get into Colbert a little bit later, but I don't think any of these people that are punching are gonna go away. And I think what this administration is eventually going to see is that by running people out of mainstream media, the dissenters who are talking shit back about Trump, if you run me out of CNN or CBS or wherever, there's rules there, there's guardrails there. God bless whatever Colbert does next year with no network person to give him notes on what he can and cannot say when he's running rampant on YouTube like Don Lemon and just making differences. I think that is going to create a bigger issue for this administration in 26, especially going
if he has an audience.
Yeah, if he builds an audience, which I think is inevitable. If you look at what Gavin Newsom's doing, and Gavin Newsom is just throwing up a couple of memes and a couple of videos in the last 2 weeks, just taunting Trump. And Gavin's not a trained entertainer. So I just think that, I just think it's going to be a very different landscape if he continues to run people off. If they were smart, they would leave us alone and let us tell our jokes in the places where there are rails.
Talking of jokes, I was going to ask whether any of you know a good Trump joke, but maybe...
He's the president of the United States of America.
Did I feed her that line? Did I?
Well, can I say something? I don't cover Trump. I cover the media that covers Trump. And I will say that the level of capitulation and kowtowing and payoffs that are going on at the top levels of media, not the day-to-day show level, the top levels, it's pretty extraordinary what's happening. Starting with ABC paying to settle the George Stephanopoulos case, and then going all the way through the things that Paramount did to get their sale approved. I mean, these are pretty unprecedented times in big media and what they are doing, and Trump knows it. After ABC paid him, the floodgates opened. He knew that he had a pressure point with all of these companies, and he is nothing if not transactional, and he is going to press every single button he can press, and he keeps doing it.
I have got a slide, actually, which I could put up right now, that just runs through some of the things that have happened that you've been talking about, Matt, there. We probably don't need to run through them in great detail, but what we can see from that, if you ever read, is that a lot has gone on. We've reported it a lot on the media show, but yes, a lot of folding, and we will come to that, but let's leave that up for now. I just want to talk to you, Roy, about Have I Got News for You, because there you are, you were alluding to your coverage of Trump being quite, robust.
If he does something crazy in the news, we have to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, is he a gift for a show like Have I Got News for You? Do you have a rule of how many Trump jokes you can do in a day? Because there must be, in a show, because there must be so many you could do potentially.
We could, but thankfully he's surrounded by a bunch of other sinister people who give us great material. So we have an opportunity to kind of spread the love. And then also, we're a show where thankfully Republican politicians, sitting Republican politicians, feel comfortable enough to come on the show and kind of try to explain and kind of go back and forth with us a little bit.
Even the MAGA ones? Do you invite MAGA ones?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had Tennessee Rep Mike Lawler, who came on our show, New York Rep Mike Lawler, who came on our show and said he would not vote to cut Medicaid. Then the next week he did. And so we called him out on that on our show the following week. We had Tim Burchett, who has been one of the staunchest opponents against DE&I regulations in America, and one of the main reasons why so many of those legislations were rolled back, and a lot of these same companies fired a bunch of people based on new policies that the administration, on bills that he co-signed on. So I think that, Trump is an endless faucet, but I think if we're not careful, there's also a sleight of hand that's happening. If Trump is the bang, 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 there's something over here. In boxing, they call it watch for the hook, because you're looking over here and then you see a punch come from this side that you never saw coming. So I think that...
Can you see it coming? Can you predict what it is?
No, that's the thing. No, that's the thing. You can't tell, and you don't know what the lone play is, but I do know if we're only locked in on what Trump is doing, then you miss these 2 or 3 other bills that get passed and slid under the door.
But you're not going to miss them on Have I Got News for You in
No.
some way, hopefully.
No, we won't.
And I'm interested in what you said about CNN, because obviously everyone here will know that your president is calling CNN corrupt, illegal, I should say, without evidence. But what you're saying is, in terms of Have I Got News for You, you don't feel that chill wind. But I wonder for people more widely inside that organisation, whether it can't help but have an impact.
Yeah, it can't help but have an impact, you know, but I think one thing CNN has done that's been good over the last couple of years is that they've given voices to conservative opinions and pundits to come on shows like Abby Phillip. And, you know, I know Jake Tapper wrote the book about Biden, and that was a big to-do from the Republican side, basically saying you knew the entire time and now you're profiting off of the book. And so I'm not saying that CNN isn't above some fair accusations from the Republican Party, but I just do not see this network in any shape or form making decisions based solely on whether or not the president's going to cost us a bunch of money in court.
But the ratings at CNN, I mean, no, I don't know your show, but the ratings at CNN have never been lower. And it's a sign that, at least of the audience, they prefer partisan television news, at least in the cable dial. They want Fox, they want MSNBC, or whatever it's going to be called. They want that perspective, and CNN has been caught from the moment Trump took office in this no man's land, where they're trying to still hold on to that illusion of impartisan news, and it's just not working from a ratings perspective.
And that's where I feel like the interesting thing with what we do is that we tend to get politicians who wouldn't talk on any other day parts on the network. There's not a chance that Mike Lawler would talk with anyone else. Maybe Caitlin Collins, like maybe just, you know, down in the DC bureau. But my hope is that that's the way through to start getting mainstream media to be trusted again. If it means I got to talk to one of your dudes for you to pay attention to the other shit that I'm saying, cool. I mean, that's what happened with Jimmy Fallon a couple of weeks ago. It's not even been a couple of weeks.
No.
It was a week ago.
He had Gutfeld on, and the ratings went up almost 30%.
Just explain to who that is for people who...
Greg Gutfeld is an 11:30 or earlier late night host on Fox News. He has a comedic kind of roundtable show that on most days has a larger audience on Fox News than the traditional late night programs on the 3 networks that are, you know, have been powers forever. So he has an audience that is larger now than the Tonight Show. And Fallon had him on, and Fallon's ratings, surprisingly, went up. And that's a guess that I don't think those shows would have booked even a year ago.
Imagine if Piers Morgan went on Graham Norton. Did I do that right? Was that an accurate?
That's good.
Yeah.
It's a good analogy.
Very
Okay.
good. And the ratings went up. Yeah, that's the key bit, right? And just as a black American comedian, we know there's this assault on diversity, equity, inclusion programs, and we'll probably be talking about that in terms of Paramount in a bit. But what is your sense of the impact that might have, or perhaps is already having on, you know, black American comedy?
It's immense. I think when you have fewer black voices in decision-making positions, you have fewer people to greenlight black and brown stories, which creates a more diverse, you know, atmosphere for creatives. You know, I think that if we're talking about scripted sitcoms in the States, there's always going to be a place, you know, for that type of stuff. But I think the issue as a black American, and this is just speaking as a man who's developed scripts with multiple networks in the States, you start getting notes from people who don't necessarily understand the nuance of the joke and what it is you're trying to do. And that's where the hurdles start coming in. And so then ultimately as a black creative, you're forced into creating something for the sake of getting a show on, but it's not completely authentic to the story you originally wanted to tell. So then white people don't rock with it because it's something they can't relate to, and black people in a heartbeat can peep the tweaks and the changes that you made, so they clock it as inauthentic as well, and then it fails, and then the next creative who comes through the door with their show, they go, we tried something like that last year and it didn't work, so let's just not do that. I you know, in terms of greenlighting black shows and brown shows, okay, that's still gonna happen. I'm sure when you split down the diversity of Emmy nominees, it's probably pretty equitable. But when it comes to the people in the decision-making positions, or when it's time to staff the writing rooms for these shows, that's where the battles for diversity really that's where they are. And I think that's what's being lost, because Hollywood is laying down just the same as a lot of these major corporations when it comes to diversity requirements. And the irony is that Hollywood is fighting to save money on productions, so they're running to other countries that also have their own regulations on who you can get. Like, you go to Canada, you got to stock it with at least, I think it's 50 to 60% Canadian crew. The number might even be higher than that.
And we have some rules like that here for Hollywood movies.
Okay.
The UK does have those rules.
Yeah.
So, like, you can't even book a Rob Lowe game show over here without still following some rules. So why are you running from the States, where you're running from one rule to another rule? So you may as well just do something that helps people.
I would like to get a sense of what it's like reporting on Trump on a day-to-day basis. That isn't you, Roy. You may be pleased about that. That is Katy Balls. That climate for journalists of, yeah, I know you said that actually, and many people have told me this on the media show, actually he's brilliant because he speaks to journalists all the time. Joe Biden probably spoke to journalists 3 times in the whole presidency, and Trump endlessly wants to speak to the media, the right media potentially, because he's certainly not talking to AP at the moment. But he's been flooding the zones and being characterized with just so much. That just must be exhausting for a start.
Yeah, I think you can definitely say it's relentless to cover Donald Trump in DC. And it depends what your deadlines are, but I think certainly, particularly if you're going for the UK publication, where we're obviously 5 hours behind in DC, it does mean there's a lot of problems with, I think, packages for broadcast, and then also obviously print deadlines. But generally speaking, I think one of the points, as you say, is about flooding the zone, which is there is so much coming out of the White House all the time. This is, in many ways, a president who is more available, as you say, than what came before. And you can have, I think there is obviously a mercurial aspect of this as to, who is in favor, who is not. Have you said Gulf of Mexico? Have you said Gulf of America? At Turnberry, you had a little AP tent far from Donald Trump's golf course because they couldn't get anywhere near it because they're not an in favor publication.
Because they won't say Gulf of
exactly.
America. Yeah.
Stood in the rain. And whereas, inside you have the traveling pool. Within the traveling pool, you have plenty of publications that Donald Trump repeatedly criticizes, it's worth pointing out. But also there's a sense where you speak to, DC journalists who've been there a long time, and they say, well, we've got time to just try and call up the president, and depending on if you get it right, he'll just pick up the phone to you. He's refused to give up his phone. So you get these stories just erupting in different places. Often there's not really a logic or a way to predict it. And then I think one of the big challenges as a journalist covering it is, what should you focus on, and what do they want you to focus on? So for example, you could argue that, there was a recent August. Also, the other thing I think is probably August tends to be known as silly season. In the 10 years I worked in Westminster, not the case in DC when you have Donald Trump, if we look at the past few weeks even. And there was they called a last minute kind of press conference in the White House briefing room with Donald Trump, where he talked about taking back control of DC. And you have about, 5 members of the cabinet or, senior members of the cabinet, Donald Trump, very long press conference. And then everyone focuses on that all day. And then you take a step back and you think, well, actually, this is slightly what Donald Trump wants us to be talking about, which is for a bunch of Democrats and members of the media to say, hey, actually, crime's not quite as bad as Donald Trump says it is. And then before you know it, they'll say, well, this person was shot. And you're almost playing into, their media devices. And I think that's one of the big challenges.
And then what about for you? You were mentioning the AP thing, but you've covered politicians here. You know there's a bit of a quid pro quo that goes on. But for you, does it have a chilling effect? Something like the attacks on AP and the ostracization of them. Where is the line for you? Are there limits on your coverage? What can you push? How can you play the system to make sure that you get the right stories and that you're not, kowtowing to a president who wants you to, but equally that you still get access?
Yeah, I think as a political journalist, when you have to do the same patch, and where you're working in Westminster or Washington, you're always working out how far can you push things while also still being able to do your job the next week. And often people will say, oh, the lobby's too cozy for that reason. You're all democracy because you're having to do that, but it's just a bit of a reality of the job. I think on this occasion, probably coming in as an international journalist, you feel a little bit of the pressure than some of the domestic ones. Because if we're being completely honest, the international journalists are not at the front of the queue for, what's going to be the call out that day. So you have a bit more freedom. And I think but certainly you speak to journalists, and I think there are a few reasons that I think that the press pack in DC is treading quite carefully at the moment. Now, one is because it is a mercurial White House, and if you are out of favor, we've seen what's happened. But also, I think there is a bit of a reckoning going on amongst DC hacks, which is not all about Donald Trump. You go back to Joe Biden, and there is still this cloud hanging over DC as to whether there was a cover-up on the state of Joe Biden's health. Obviously, lots of journalists have since written books on it and really gone into the details. But for a long time, if you said that, you were told, you were behaving badly or so forth. And when I attended the White House Correspondents' Dinner, my first week in DC, you had one of the journalists get up on stage, and there was no comedian and there was no president, so it was just journalists talking about journalism. And Alex Thompson, who's one of the co-authors, said, well, we all need to take a hard look at ourselves because we haven't been living up to the standards we need as well. So I think that's another aspect when it comes to that, and then combine it with the fact that Trump has been voted for a second time by the American people. Some people are slightly saying, well, hang on a minute, maybe I need to take this person a bit more seriously. So
You did that dinner, didn't you? Roy compared that dinner back in.
Yeah, the
yeah,
Biden
under
one.
Biden.
The last Biden one, yeah.
And then there's a reason why they didn't have a compare this time.
Yeah, it was me, Colin Jost, and then Alex Thompson. So yeah, that was an interesting time. I do think that the corporatization of media is also a big part of the problem. Like when you think about what newspapers were 10 years ago, 20 years ago even, just the idea of an investigative reporter, the idea of a local reporter being able to also be watchdogs on the administration by watching the state reps and the congressmen for what they're doing back in their districts, you lose that, and then that's when you're into manipulation land where if your media outlet doesn't do what we need you to do, then we're just gonna dissolve your company. And I think ultimately the mistake we've sometimes made and the rock and the hard that journalists are in is that corporations are not people. Corporations, you cannot expect them to care about people the same way, but when you're a journalist and you work for a corporation, you're often being, that's what happened with Amber Ruffin in the Correspondents' Dinner, which is the one that where no one was there, that was the one Amber Ruffin was supposed to be at.
Yeah, just explain what happened.
So, one of our co-hosts on the show, Amber Ruffin, who does a lot of stuff with Seth Meyers, she agreed to host the Correspondents' Dinner, and mass deportation started, and you started getting more and more crazier stories on what ICE is doing to legal people in the country. And, we assume, and that part is Amber's story to tell, but we assume that there was a call made to the correspondents, the Press Corps Association. These are the people in charge of the people who get to be in the pack. If you let that woman on that stage and you let her talk shit about this president, we're going to revoke all of your credentials, and anybody that is trying to get anything of decency to report on for your livelihood, we're going to deny you. So now the press corps is forced to choose between their longevity and freedom of speech. And Amber, God bless her, she refused to kowtow. They wanted her to joke from both sides, and she refused. She said, there is no both-sidedness when you have people in cages. Like, it's just not what
Has she said that publicly?
Yeah, she said something to the similar on our show the week after it happened. It's somewhere on YouTube, but she made it perfectly clear that when you lay out what is happening between both sides, there is no joke you could tell about a Democrat that is equivalent to some of the heinous policies that are currently being enacted in the first 3 months of this administration.
But that is a partisan position.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, but she declined, and the press still has access, so they can still report and tell us what's going on. So I guess that's a win.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, why does Donald Trump hate public broadcasting so much? And I'm referencing, I've got a problem with my microphone, supposedly. And also, I guess I want to reference, the changes to PBS, NPR, Voice of America.
This goes back decades. This has been a Republican cause for decades. They feel that public broadcasting has skewed left and is espousing liberal positions. NPR has shows that appeal more towards, the kind of the stereotypical bi-coastal elites. So this is not a Donald Trump initiated thing. He just now has the power and he has the the influence to get it done. And this is, it's the amount of funding that goes to these outlets is so small when you consider the big picture of what the federal government does, that it's never really been that big of a priority for the kind of budget busting or budget conscious representatives. But now, because it has been swept up in this liberal media, woke media type debate, it was able to be passed. And
we've actually got a slide on it from Truth Social, just to put up there: defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, PBS and NPR, which is worse than CNN and MSNBC. Well, he doesn't call it that, does he? Put together. So there you go. That's Donald Trump's view. Dorothy, do you think public broadcasting in America is dead?
Well, I feel very strongly that the US made a big mistake when it got rid of regulation in 1987. I don't think it's dead. I mean, Frontline is still making great programs, but if the key reason for me being here is to say what should we learn in Britain,
and we'll definitely get to that properly, yeah.
It is, you must not get rid of regulation. And one of the key things about regulation is it helps to bring trust because you have to have balance. And in some of the US media, there has not been balance. Some of it has been liberal, and they haven't listened enough to other voices. And that is also an error that journalists here have made. There have, on some of our public broadcasters, not been sufficient right-wing voices heard.
And if we talk about what's happening, what's going on more widely in the media industry, and bring in, Sky, Dance, Paramount, CBS, just a quick fire from all of you. If you were running a big US media corporation right now, would you be settling or fighting? Matt?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I have kind of a nuanced view of that. I personally would be fighting, and I think that the impact of the settlements that we've seen has been pretty calamitous for the media industry and other industries as well. However, I'm not in that seat. I'm not trying to close an $8 billion transaction. And the Redstone family that owned CBS and owned all the different outlets, this was a existential moment for that family. And they could have either stood up to Trump, or they could argue for paying him off, and they chose to pay him off, and the deal got done. So I understand.
Clear business case.
Yeah, I understand the business case for it. And in fact, Sherry Redstone did an interview with the New York Times yesterday in which she said it was a bargain. She expected to have to pay more.
And I should be clear, they're legal settlements, not payoffs. Legal settlements.
Legal settlements of Trump's claims against 60 Minutes.
Legal settlements.
But it's when you're looking at this from a business perspective and you are in the chair and you're saying, I can fight this and I can become a target for the next 2 years, or I can pay what is a very small amount of money for my corporation and have this go away, I understand why they do it.
And let's just do it fast. Settle or fight?
Of course they're going to settle. Why do we think that billionaires are going to be the protectors of media freedom? Billionaires are about billions. They're not about a free press.
And Bernie Sanders, well, he took up that same view, perhaps not surprisingly, but he was similarly echoing what you were saying. Pretty obvious why Paramount chose to surrender to Trump. There was a $2.4 billion. They were going to receive $2.4 billion from the sale of Paramount to Skydance, and they can only receive that money if the Trump administration approves this deal.
I mean, the argument for not settling is a business argument as well, because if you are not one of these people who is trying to close a deal and get out of the business, like the Redstones were trying to get out of the business, you have to deal with that precedent going forward. And if I'm ABC News, I now know that if we get sued over something that we cover, there's going to be another settlement and another and potentially endless settlements.
So just to remind people, there was the decision to settle over the CBS 60 Minutes interview with Kamala Harris, which Trump claimed CBS had deceptively edited, and CBS said it was not doctored or deceitful.
And which almost every observer and legal expert said was a frivolous and very winnable case.
Yes, so they settled. What about the cancelling of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert? Because it's obviously easy from here to look over and think, oh, that must be a political decision. But is that actually also a financial decision?
I've done a lot of reporting on this, and I've come to the conclusion that yes, that show was losing tens of millions of dollars. Now, you can argue there's other value to a show like this. CBS makes a lot of money on retrans fees that they get because they have a wide variety of programming. If you put that in, maybe it's a different calculus. But in terms of the P&L for that show, it was losing a lot of money, and they had discussed for a long time what the future would be there. They had a 12:30 p.m., 12:30 a.m. show that was also losing money. They got rid of that, the James Corden show. He left. They put in something else there. The host decided to leave, so they said, we're not going to program 12:30. Then they looked at 11:30, and it had been a process for a long time. The timing of it is suspect, right when...
And the guarantees, right? The FCC has had to give these guarantees.
Yeah, the FCC had to sign off on this deal. It happened right as the FCC was going to potentially make its final decision, right as the not payoff settlement of the Trump litigation was happening. The argument from the CBS side is that when you are in the late night business, you have to sign your talent a year in advance to new deals. They had talent that was, the producers that were on August to August deals, and they had to sign them for the next season, and they had to basically tell them if they wanted to cancel the show, their deal was going to be up in May.
So that's contractual.
It's a contractual thing. Colbert's deal was up in May, and this is the time when you would start to renegotiate that.
But when you're getting government demands, for example, on diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of
Absolutely.
the decision, how do you
And
react?
you know what
Also, while Colbert is talking shit about the deal
that Monday he had
with
made
Trump.
comments calling it a big fat bribe. So the optics are terrible. We have no reason to give these people any kind of benefit of the doubt.
But I guess the question is
but there are explanations that do explain why they did it.
And also,
That's a bit suspicious.
Listen, I get it, and
Everything's
I'm not
suspicious to
defending
me,
the
though.
decision, but I think it's best looked at on a scale, on a range where 100% political is on one side, 100% economics is on the other, and where you fall on that scale is how much you believe politics played into it.
but then I suppose you've got cancelling Colbert in one hand, but then you've also got the signing up of South Park for $1.5 billion. That's a show that certainly doesn't mince its words, and it's animation, if you like, on Donald Trump. Latest season opened on full-scale mockery of the president and the decision to settle. So I wonder, Roy, do you think that in the end, Trey Parker and Matt Stone are going to end up being the new leaders of the resistance to Trump in the media?
I don't think we should ever look to Trey Parker and Matt Stone to be the leaders,
Why not?
but we are always appreciative whenever they join into the fight.
But they don't always. They are
don't.
not. They are equal opportunity offenders, and I think that has been key to their appeal. And I think deep down, the Trump people know that. The Trump people know that a lot of Trump supporters like South Park and have liked what they've done over the past 27 years. Colbert, not a lot of Trump fans watching Colbert. I mean, his entire rise at CBS was tied to the moment that he became a resistance comedian and went all in on the politics. Jimmy Fallon on NBC was tousling Trump's hair and being more down the middle. Colbert went all in on the anti-Trump stuff and got the ratings for it. And Trump knew that. South Park is a little more dicey for him.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I mean, I think of the satire that cuts through in terms of the DC conversation, the one that everyone has been talking about is South Park, because you have a bunch of Trump supporters, yes, to the left, but also if you think about the withering South Park on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and
or Tom Cruise, or
exactly,
the COVID stuff. They are
Exactly.
very equal opportunity.
And therefore you saw, yes, you had some figures in the administration complain, Kristen Noem and others, but Charlie Kirk, influential MAGA voice, actually made South Park his picture on his X account and lent into it. So I think there's a sense which is, perhaps it is because they go for everyone, but that was one where no one wanted to quite dismiss it as fake news, liberal, in that sense. They took it a bit more seriously.
And we are going to keep talking, but I just want to remind all of you that we will have a few questions at the end if anyone delivers any. So I think you've got a way of doing that, and I hope you know how, because I don't. But it's something to do with the app. It's through the app, basically. So if you could go on the app, if you do have any questions, we will do some just towards the end
I mean, in
of the
some ways,
session.
South Park was the manosphere before the manosphere.
Absolutely.
Come on, that's the quote of the night or the day. We're in the daytime now. As a news person, I suppose, Dorothy, I'm a news person, and I look at what's happening, and I wonder whether actually it's the news side of what's happening that we should be focusing on. That what will CBS news be like in 3 years' time when they're covering the next election? Are these the news sides of these business wounded, mortally wounded in some cases?
Well, there's still fantastic journalism being done. And I go back to, do not rely on billionaires and politicians to protect your press freedom. You need to rely on journalists to do that. Some journalists may lose their jobs. What you have to be aware of if you're a journalist, whatever country you're in, but some countries worse than others, is that if you tell the truth, you can lose your job. In somewhere like Gaza, you can be killed. And journalism is a serious profession in that sense. So every day I read brilliant journalism coming out of the United States, as well as feeling very worried. So I don't, from here, feel that it's terminal, but journalists need to rise up together and speak about these issues in the US, just as I believe that journalists around the world have to rise up together and speak about the threat to journalists in Gaza and the threats to journalists in the UK. Ultimately, we have to rely on ourselves as a profession and on the good people. Trump's always talking about bad people, bad people. Well, there are lots of good people, and but we need to be active.
As an American, do you have confidence that in 3 years' time, when the next election is coming round, that the news journalists can treat this administration robustly?
I think American journalists have no choice but to see and hear conservatives and treat their claims and concerns as valid no matter how ridiculous they are. I do not know if there are enough American journalists that care enough about the totality of our society to sacrifice their career for the things that you're talking about. Because then the question just becomes, how many journalists can you fire before you find a compliant one? And I think that where a lot of Americans deal with, especially when you talk about Gaza, I think what a lot of American journalists sometimes deal with is also, if speaking out on that cost me the ability to cover all of these other atrocities that are happening domestically, have I helped? Which fire do you choose to put out? And I wonder if that, and I agree with you, it will definitely take that. It will take that from all those corporations that were on that slide as well at the highest levels, because it's not just the journalist taking a chance. You need the boss and the copy editor and the assignment desk and everybody else also standing beside the decision to run that story or to even cover that story. And I just don't know if we have enough people that are as selfless as what is needed to fix modern day journalism in America.
But I think if we look to some of the recent stories in the US papers, there is lots of fearless journalism going on from Washington, DC, and more widely in America. You look at, for example, recent stories on Elon Musk, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal that spoke Elon Musk and babies, and I think it went on to an award and so forth.
Trump and Epstein.
Yeah, we've had lots of Trump Epstein reporting. You've also got, there are very regularly days where the White House are furious about a story, and the story is still ran, and the journalists are still operating. So I think that, for all the, yes, journalists can go further, there is this sense of, that it is still the case that I don't think the media at large are being kowtowed yet by a second-term Trump.
The most interesting thing to watch this year will be what happens at 60 Minutes, because that is the #1 news program in the US. The parent company of CBS now is in the hands of the Ellison family. David Ellison, I sat down with him last week and I asked him specifically, what are you going to do about CBS and 60 Minutes? He said, all I want is down the middle. I want both sides represented.
And what's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with that, but that's a very easy thing to say. As people in media know, sometimes the story doesn't have obvious both sides. And 60 Minutes is the #1 program because it often will take an angle on a story that gives a voice to somebody or has a perspective, has a narrative through it. And when you have David Ellison talking about bringing in someone like Barry Weiss, who runs a sort of quasi-reactionary conservative style website to be a overseer of balance at CBS, that is asking for trouble there. And we'll see how that plays out, because even with all of the scandal and all of the stuff around the settlement, nobody actually killed a story at 60 Minutes this past season. Nobody even influenced, well, I shouldn't say influenced, nobody said don't do this or take that out. There was complaining after the fact, but nobody was stifled. We'll see if that stays.
And I just, as we hurtle towards the end, do want to bring it back to here. That was part of what we were supposed to be discussing. You know, Dorothy, you are somebody who's been a commissioner for many years. You're obviously still plugged in. I wondered what you're hearing about what all this that's going on in the US might mean, or is already meaning, for UK production companies who are maybe trying to pitch the US or go into co-production. I think we know that, you know, Trump taking away, for example, more than $1 billion of government funding to National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service, while PBS has a co-production deal with the BBC. So that's one way that there could be an impact. But are you hearing, I have been hearing people saying we're not pitching those kind of stories anymore, it's much more risk averse?
Yes, but I also hear people say they're still pitching successfully to Frontline. I think it makes us, it reminds us how fortunate we are in this country, that we have relatively stable and very high, in international terms, trust in our media, because under regulation, they have to give all points of view, which are reasonable points of view. And some of the stuff that happened with Biden, not telling the truth about him, actually technically ought not to be able to happen in Britain. So there have, under the Tories, there were moves to get rid of regulation. We have to fight that. We definitely have to be sure on public service broadcasting that we put right-wing voices. We don't just let them control and say absolutely mad things, but we do need more. I do think that we need to hear more from the right in Britain.
And is trust, Matt, in America, is trust a kind of optional brand value, an optional brand value in the US, as opposed to at the heart of what the
U.S. has a couple of issues. I mean, primarily, the First Amendment in the U.S. gives a lot of leeway to various points of view that may have been considered fringe at one point, but via social media and the digital ecosystem have now gone much more mainstream. And we have very powerful social media companies whose algorithms are designed to amplify those voices in order to increase engagement. And because of that, I think that is just the under-discussed underpinning of a lot of the problems that we see in trust in media. Because you're hearing an increasingly radical version of what you want to hear that then all of a sudden radicalizes you. And the centrist media that you maybe once paid attention to is now not trustworthy, because what you're seeing all day on your feeds is the radical version of a partisan opinion. And I don't know the ecosystem in the UK, but in the US, that is, I think, the underpinning of a lot of what we're seeing about the lack of trust. Amplified by the president, of course, and a political party, but the digital ecosystem is a big part of that.
Well, here the BBC is still the most used provider of news, including online, and I think that's a big difference. And also people like Joseph Kennedy just talking rubbish, Robert Kennedy Jr. talking rubbish about vaccines actually wouldn't be allowed here.
Yeah, because also to the point of, you have these people with these fringe ideologies that are now mainstream ideologies. On the other side, you have liberals who were trying to kind of laugh and satirical joke it off a little bit, and now it's gotten serious. And so now I think there has to be a change in the approach somehow. And this also goes for comedians, but just journalistically speaking, and how do you reach someone with that type of mind now? Because you're taking in hardcore, uncut ideology now. Like before, it was 20%. I don't do cocaine for real. But like this.
There was a filter. There's no filter anymore.
There's no filter. And so the idea of using humor to reach you and maybe change you could have worked in Jon Stewart's first term, but now it's how could you, and you're dumb, and like the idea of attacking these people also does not reach them. It does not change them. So I think there has to be a change in not just in regaining their trust, there also has to be a reframing of how the truth is presented to reach these people. And I think that's a very hard Rubik's Cube to solve.
We do have some questions just before we end, and so I'm going to read out. Well, the first one from Anonymous. Hello, Anonymous. I don't know whether any of you can answer this, but have a go. Matt, maybe it's you. What are the predictions for the future of Channel 5 in the UK? It's a child company of Paramount who have DEI obligations in this market as opposed to what Skydance agreed with Trump.
Well, first of all, how long is Paramount going to own that?
That was what I was going to say.
Because the international TV networks have been identified as non-core. And when you're non-core, that typically means you're on the market. But I think a lot of the DEI stuff is US specific. I mean, CBS had some of the most aggressive DEI goals. In the aftermath of George Floyd in 2020, I believe, I might get the percentage wrong, they put in a mandate at the company that they wanted 20 to 40% of their writers and showrunners and talent on shows to be people of color, among the most aggressive in town. And the economic and business justification for that, which I've always argued should be the core here for diversity. You're trying to reach as many people as possible. Why would you not want to have a diverse group of people on screen and behind the camera? But that has now gone away. So what the question is now is, are we going to see those efforts still happen without the mandates, or are the mandates going to be an excuse to roll everything back? And I don't know the answer to that.
I've got a question here from Alex Fagan. Does Trump use the media to his advantage more than his predecessors, or is he just more transparent about it?
I think he does use it to his advantage. I suppose everyone has different tactics. I think Joe Biden's team often were just trying to plan his schedule around keeping him away from the media, whereas Donald Trump's tactic is almost how much can you get him in front of the media? And I called him the Ask Me Anything president in a recent column, but also there's this just sense of he's always talking. I interviewed Peter Mandelson last month, and he was just saying he said himself he's never seen anything like it. It's just this constant narrative coming from Donald Trump, which means it's so hard for his opponents to get anything in. And it can be serious issues of the day. He might just start talking about the staffing arrangements, so Jeffrey Epstein back in the day.
Rosie or might be on the
Super
roof
Bowl.
of the White House for no reason.
Exactly. Yesterday he started trying out the speakers because he's planning to have a big party. We're told it's going to be the best party ever. I'm not sure the full press pack is invited.
Are you going?
Waiting to hear.
Waiting for the invite.
Do you have his phone number?
Not yet. Give me another month.
I've always wondered, is his phone number widely disseminated?
I think those who have it don't want other journalists to get it.
Oh, they don't?
But there are enough journalists who have it. It's not too hard to find one.
And it's not online, or it's not?
No, and it's a private one. But I think that sense of he uses the media to constantly have that conversation. I think that's unique and it's savvy in some ways.
But may I just say briefly, we haven't discussed the role of the US media in bringing him to power in the first place by probably covering him far more than he deserved.
But there is just to say briefly, so, there's an interesting book on the 2024 election that's just come out. And one of the points they made was Joe Biden had in their election campaign, they tried to get him to do some town halls and get it on the networks. And the network said, sorry, Joe Biden's ratings are so low, we can't justify that. So you do get back to the point, which is Donald Trump gets high ratings, and that does then
that's why they did it.
Point.
Yeah.
And just one last question to slip in. In what ways is Trump's relationship with US media influencing the UK public's relationship with the media here, the legacy mainstream media here? Do you think it is?
Most people in Britain think Donald Trump's bonkers.
Yes, but do his attacks on the media there impact their views of the media here?
I think that when the Conservatives attack the media, particularly Boris Johnson attacking the media, that did damage the media. He was copying the same thing, constantly saying we were liars, which is why I said he was a liar.
And is that a note to end it on? Perhaps it is. I don't know. I just was going to say thank you all so much. I've got 2 thank yous. Thanks to Jimmy Mulville for providing us so wonderfully with this fabulous man who's been brilliant. And also to Thomas Iannu from Creative Edits who made our film. And then I do have to ask the question that Edinburgh TV Festival wants me to ask, which is we're celebrating 50 years of the festival, 50 years of great British television. I know there are 2 Americans here, but do any of you have a favourite British programme from the last 50 years? Mine's Grange Hill, just going to say that.
Channel 4 News.
Sorry, mine's Channel 4 News. Yours is Channel 4 News, for sure.
Mine's The Office, the original Office.
Come on.
Yeah.
Katie, have you got one?
Vicar of Dibley.
And Roy?
Danger Mouse.
Yay.
Come on, that's a good one. Well, that's a better
Grew up
note to
on
end
it.
on. Grew up on it, and you're still watching it.
Yeah.
Hope so. Thank you all very much, and thank you to this brilliant panel. Thank you.